Despite its decent controls, the GameSir X2 has terrible shoulder buttons and a questionably high price, making it a very hard sell. Hello everyone and welcome to RetroBreeze. Today I'm going to be reviewing the GameSir X2. This is a USB-C based controller for mobile phones. The GameSir clips around your phone using a spring clamp mechanism and gives it a traditional gamepad layout with 2 analog sticks, 4 face buttons, a D-pad, start, select, function keys, and shoulder buttons. It connects via USB-C, which means that latency is not an issue. Now this is a cool controller, and so I should preface this review by saying that I do really like it. I've used it nearly every day for around 3 weeks and I've been really enjoying it, for the most part. However, this controller does have some very apparent flaws which we'll get to later. For now, let's jump in and talk about the design. The GameSir's design is actually really good. It's one of its best characteristics. It has a Nintendo Switch Joy-Con-like look to it, which I think is what they were going for, especially given the red and blue color on the analog sticks. It has a familiar layout and overall appearance, containing everything you'd expect from a normal gamepad. On the top you can see your shoulder buttons, which we'll talk about later. On the bottom we have a USB-C port for pass-through charging. The back has raised grips with a rubbery textured material which is super grippy and makes the X2 supremely comfortable to hold. The whole controller feels great in the hands, largely thanks to the shape. It doesn't feel too cheap, but it doesn't feel necessarily premium either. It's basically bang in the middle. It doesn't feel like an Xbox Series or Switch Pro controller, but it doesn't feel as bad as the iPega either. Overall, I like the design and the in-hand feeling. Maybe it's just me, but these grips fit absolutely perfectly in my hands. Whether I want to rest my fingers lower on the bump to access the D-pad, or rest my finger on the trigger for easier use of the analog stick, the GameSir X2 is always comfortable. It's also very light, which is important because we'll be adding a phone's weight to it shortly. Now onto the buttons. They're a bit of a mixed bag. There's nothing necessarily wrong with them, but they don't feel particularly premium either. They're just a light plastic with the labels engraved. The action is very clicky. There is not a lot of travel, especially in comparison to other clicky buttons like those on the Nintendo Switch. These just feel kind of flat. If you prefer clicky buttons, you'll probably like these too. These and the D-pad are really pleasant to use for retro games, especially those which require fast, tactile gameplay. The analog sticks are interesting. They actually look like this, very small and slippery and not very usable. However, these rubber caps are included in the box. They slip right over the top and improve the feel of these sticks by like 1000%. They feel great with the caps on. The motion of the sticks is very light though. There's not much resistance, tension, or weight to them. To me, they do feel a bit cheap, especially coming from something like an Xbox controller, or even small sticks like those on the Switch Lite. I actually really like the sticks on the iPega I reviewed before. These are just a bit too light for my liking. Also of note is a certain scratchiness at the 12 o'clock position on both sticks. I'm not sure if this is the analog module or some friction between the plastics. It doesn't disrupt gameplay, but it's worth noting from a quality standpoint. In the center of the controller, there's a rubberized inlet that appears to be very high quality, with an attractive hex pattern and the GameSir logo emblazoned in the middle. The rubber on the sides is well designed. The flutes here actually allow sound from your phone's speakers to escape upward instead of just absorbing it. The USB-C connector on the other side pivots up and down and a fraction left and right. This is a great design because it ensures that your phone's port is safe from tension, pulling, or other destructive activities. This connector will break long before your phone's USB port does. Now you might notice that the left side here has no rubber on it. That's because I cut it off. With the rubber on, the USB-C connector here will probably not be able to reach far enough to reliably connect to a phone that's in a case, meaning you'd have to remove your case every time you want to use the controller. By simply cutting the rubber from this side, which will also void your warranty, the Poco F1 here fits perfectly even in a bulky Spigen case. This improves usability, or at least convenience of the controller by a lot, on the size of your phone. With a smaller phone, like my Asus Zenfone 8, the setup looks kinda goofy. Thankfully my Poco F1 in its case is almost a perfect fit. Although, to be honest, this does definitely look like a phone with a controller stuck to it. I think it's a bit clumsy looking just by nature, and it's not very immersive. By contrast, the Razer key sheath surrounds the edges of the phone and makes it much more like a games console than just a phone and a controller. Let's go ahead and jump right into a game and see how the GameSir works. Here I'm playing Sonic Riders Tournament Edition, which uses the analog stick and face buttons mostly. Overall it feels great, although I do notice the lightness of the stick. I'd call it a bit twitchy to use. There's also a distinct clack when the stick hits the sides, which is a bit distracting. At this next turn, I'm going to change the audio to an original recording. See if you can hear anything distinctly here. Did you hear it? I'm talking about this. And here is the GameSir X2's biggest flaw. This is a pretty good controller until you get to the top. The shoulder buttons, which you might have noticed I haven't discussed at all up until this point, and that's because I wanted to leave it till kinda last. Quite simply, these shoulder buttons are absolutely awful. They are so bad that it's actually difficult to put it into words. They're easily the worst shoulder buttons I've ever had the displeasure of using on any device ever. Now the problem here is that these buttons are just a hard piece of plastic, the button itself, pushing against a tactile switch, which is another hard piece of plastic or metal. There's nothing else in here. No mechanism to give it any travel, not even a small piece of rubber membrane to cushion it. The click here is just the click of a tactile switch. Unfortunately, the triggers are the same. They have about 1 millimeter of travel and are just horribly loud and clicky. And in the games I showed you just now that use the shoulders minimally, it's not really a big problem. But I want to show you what this sounds like in a game that relies on the triggers heavily. Here, I'm playing WRC7 via Moonlight Streaming. I'll play the original audio again so you can hear what this sounds like properly. This is unedited, unenhanced, and just what the microphone itself picked up. Take a listen and excuse my poor rallying skills. So yeah, this is a really terrible experience, and it's a similar story with FPS games too. These buttons are so loud and so clicky that it becomes a total distraction. The more you use them, the harder they are to ignore. They are quite simply the worst shoulder buttons I've ever used. Similarly, compared to every single other controller on the market, especially at this price point, the GameSir falls apart completely. This conveniently leads me to my final point about this controller. The GameSir X2 ranges anywhere from $80 to $60. I paid around $69.99 for mine. Now let me give you a quick comparison. Here's the 8BitDo Pro 2. Take a look at the quality of this controller. The D-pad is amazing, the analog sticks are weighty and solid, face buttons have a perfect mix of soft and tactile. It has full analog triggers and is loaded with features like custom profiles and 4 different connection modes. This controller sells for as low as $29.99 US. This is less than half the price of the GameSir X2. So my question is, what exactly are you getting for your money with the GameSir? Even though I do like it, and it works specifically well for retro games that don't use the shoulders, I absolutely do not believe that this controller is worth its massively inflated price, and especially not 2 to 3 times the price of such brilliant high quality controllers like the Pro 2, or mainstream controllers like the Xbox Series controller, which is cheaper, the Switch Pro controller, which is cheaper, and the DualShock 4, which is cheaper. If you really look at it, for the price, this controller is incredibly poor. Let me say it again. I don't dislike this controller in general, other than the shoulder buttons, but where has my money actually gone? It's gone here, the sliding mechanism. I'm paying a huge premium for the novelty of putting my phone in the middle of the controller, and I personally just can't justify that. The quality of this controller is serviceable when considered by itself, but the cost to value ratio is totally out of whack. So we've been here for a while, so I'll sum it up here. Do I like the GameSir X2? I do like it. It's a great little controller on its own, adds essential gamepad controls to your phone in a very comfortable form factor. The only truly bad thing about it is the shoulder buttons, and they are truly horrible. Why not just add a simple rubber membrane to reduce the hardness of the click? I'd be happy with just this. Although at this price, some actually quality shoulder buttons would also be welcome. Despite how much I like the controller overall, we really shouldn't be paying such a high price for such a relatively low quality controller. Now I'm parroting myself here, so I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think about the GameSir in the comments. Do you have it? Like it? Hate the shoulder buttons? I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Also feel free to subscribe if you like my videos. I'm just getting off the ground, so anything is appreciated. Thank you very much for watching RetroBreeze.